webinar today. Over the next 25 minutes or so, if we've done our job properly, Simon and I should have been able to give you two things. First of all, we should have been able to make the case and shown you the evidence for what we believe needs to be a reevaluation of the traditional approach to communications effectiveness and communications effectiveness measurement. So essentially, the case for a System 1 approach to communications strategy and communications testing, and we will talk you through the rationale for that case as well as the evidence that we believe necessitates it. And secondly, we will be able to show you some examples of really fantastic System 1 advertising. And those examples are from the Super Bowl. So for those of you located outside the United States, Super Bowl is the final of the NFL playoff season. And it's a terrific forum for advertisers. Some of the most, the most expensive advertising real estate in the world. And advertisers here in the US have, done a terrific job, I think, of airing some phenomenal System 1 creative. So it should certainly get the creative juices flowing a little bit in terms of, different types of advertising that might work from a System 1 perspective. So let's get started, and really, start off by thinking about, well, what is System 1 and System 2? And some people may be familiar, but it's a concept introduced by Daniel Kahneman. Now, he is famous for being the only non-economist to win the Nobel Prize for economics. And Kahneman essentially describes two systems in the brain. System 1, which is the fast, intuitive, gut, instinctive part of the brain. That's the fast part of the brain. And System 2, and that's the rational, cognitive, slow, somewhat painful, deliberate part of the brain, the slow part of the brain. Now, the interesting part about System 1 and System 2 is that traditional marketing strategy and consequently a lot of the market research tools for measuring marketing effectiveness have really emphasized System 2 over System 1. But the problem with that is that if you put it in a computing analogy, System 2 is able to process information at about 50 bytes a second. So it's the Commodore 64 or the Atari of the brain, whereas System 1 is able to process information at about 11 million bytes a second. It's a vastly superior processing system, and therefore really dictates the way we respond to different types of stimulus, including marketing communications, as human beings. In other words, we're not thinking machines that feel, we're feeling machines that think. So let me document. We've got a little test for you coming up, Simon, so I hope you're paying attention. You're a quantitative market researcher by training, so this should be relatively easy for you. Okay. What is the answer to this simple calculation?
That's a toughie, 4.
Okay, correct. Good job. You may well have lost your job if you'd have got that wrong. And what is the answer to this calculation?
Yeah, around about 400. I'm not sure. Don't know.
Okay. So that's an example of System 1 and System 2 type stimulus. For 2 plus 2, Simon, I'm pretty sure you didn't, calculate 1, 2, 3, 4 and count it up. Your System 1 just knew the answer. It was an instinctive reaction. The stimulus just prompted your System 1 to give the response without really thinking about it. And it was relatively painless. It was easy and simple for you. The second calculation, 17 times 24, it's much more difficult. It required some System 2 thinking, and it was painful. You didn't get to the answer, but I'm sure you would have done in the end. and I'm sat opposite you right now, and I could see the frown on your brow. System 2 is a painful system, and it's not one we want to use as human beings, and therefore we don't use it very often. We think a lot less than we like to think we think. So to give you another example, as I mentioned, Simon and I are sat here in San Diego, and Simon's based in Los Angeles. And for those who aren't familiar with the geography, it's about a 2-hour drive from LA down to San Diego. And I'd ask you to think about, what your morning routine yesterday, Simon, as you made the commute. So, the first thing you mentioned that you did was brush your teeth. And there's a photo here that everyone can see of Simon brushing his teeth. Please, if you receive this deck afterwards, don't leave it lying around for small children to see. They may be a little frightened by the picture.
You're very kind.
But as you were brushing your teeth, did you think about it? Did you think about the strokes you were going to make, the amount of toothpaste you were going to put on it, the amount of time you were going to brush your teeth, or how did you sort of approach that task?
Well, that's still pretty much asleep at this point. I mean, my eyes might have been open, but yeah, the brain wasn't on.
Okay, so you were on pilot mode with System 1 making all your decisions. So the next thing you mentioned you did, you got dressed, so you're looking a little smarter here, very sharp shirt you're buttoning up. As you buttoned up the shirt, and you thought about putting each button together, and you put your left arm into the right sleeve and right arm into the right sleeve. Did you think through that, or was that sort of instinctive as well?
No, still pretty on autopilot. It's pre-coffee, so not really thinking much.
And then here you are, about to start the commute. The wheel of your car, 2-hour drive. You took over a lot of cars passed you. You had to follow the right directions, make many choices in terms of when to turn, when not to turn. How many of those did you think about while you were commuting for 2 hours?
No, I mean it's the same freeway south for 120 miles, so no turns really. So it's pretty much an autopilot, listening to the radio.
Okay, so I mean really the point we're making here then is that you didn't use your System 2 at all that morning. You made thousands and thousands of choices, but none of them necessitated your System 2. And what we found is that System 1 really is responsible for more than 95% of our decisions. It really is what dictates our behaviors, and therefore it's critical really that the communications that we receive, really trigger System 1 as opposed to System 2. So, let me recap. System 1, emotional, intuitive, fast, effortless. System 2 is much more rational, logical. It's slow. It's quite frankly a little bit painful. And when we ask consumers to really use their System 2, they don't want to. So BrainJuicer, what we've done is design a new model for consumer behavior based around System 1, and there's really 3 pillars to it. The first is social, so this is the idea that we're not very good at reporting our own behavior and thinking through what we've done, but we're actually very good at noticing what other people do. There's the environmental, so this is the notion that we really are just slaves to the context around us. All of our behaviors and decisions are heavily influenced by context. And then specifically related to the communications testing area, there's the personal pillar. And this is really all about our personal emotions. So how did it make me feel? Did this piece of communication trigger a System 1 reaction through a positive feeling, and therefore I'm going to act without really consciously thinking about it? And we believe so passionately in a System 1 model for marketing and for market research that at BrainJuicer we've mapped all of our solutions, all of our research methodologies back to this System 1 model of consumer behavior. Now, in the communication sphere specifically, we're going to borrow a little bit of language directly from Kahneman. And he said, the answer to an easy question, how do I feel about it, serves as an answer to a much harder question. What do I actually think about it, and therefore what am I going to do? And really, we would argue that the only question that a communications testing approach needs to ask is, how do you feel about it? From that question, we're going to be able to ascertain how people are interpreting any piece of communication. So is it using their system 1 or is it using their system 2? And therefore, that would indicate how effective that piece of communication is going to be in terms of driving behavior and driving business gain. So out with the old approach, the classical model of, engage me, deliver a rational message that is, relevant, credible, somewhat newsworthy, and in a way linked to the brand to drive my behavior. In with a System 1 approach that triggers my System 1, is easy to interpret, makes me feel good, and therefore is going to subconsciously impact my decision making. Hopefully that makes sense for everybody.
Great. Okay, well, first question. The theory is all very nice, but do we have any evidence to back all this up?
Well, yes, we do, Simon. Lots and lots of evidence is backing this up. The first sort of pioneers in the field were really Binet and Field, and they partnered with the IPA, the Institute of Practitioners in Advertising, who are owners of the largest advertising effectiveness database in the world, in the UK. And what they did was segment that database based on communications that had a rational, a combined rational and an emotional strategy. And what they found was that communications with an emotional strategy were much more likely to deliver the largest business effects. And in this context, business effects are defined as sales increase, share gain, or increase in price elasticity. What was really interesting was that when Binet and Field set out, they actually thought that the middle column, the combined, was going to be most powerful, but they ended up disproving their own theory. It really is all about emotion. Most recently, Binet and Field have also built on that analysis. They have looked at campaigns that lasted 3 or more years, and the ability of an emotional ad strategy over time to deliver increased profit is almost twice that of a rational or a somewhat rational and emotional strategy. So it does seem that if you give emotional advertising time to embed, if you give the campaign time to really kick in, the upside is just tremendous. Now, at BrainJuicer, we've also done a lot of work to understand the effectiveness of different advertising styles. And we have a way of measuring emotion. It's using our face trace tool, which is anchored to the work of Paul Ekman. And our emotion into action score is a 1-number summary of emotional response. Now, looking at our 1-number summary of emotional response, emotion into action, we can see that it's much, much more predictive of copy from the IPA database that is likely to deliver the largest business effects. So ads that do well on emotion are more likely to deliver sales increase, share gain, or better price elasticity than ads that either deliver the right message or cut through very well. And cut through in this context really meaning the measure of breakthrough in a traditional survey, so engagement or recall, whatever that might be. And what we're able to do through our emotion into action score is really tie advertising effectiveness to a star rating system. So a very simple System 1 system, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 stars, based on emotional response. And 5-star ads are what everybody should be aiming for. 5-star emotional ads, because they're the ads that are most likely to deliver profit gain, share gain, some reduction in price sensitivity, and in many cases also go viral. And we'll circle back around to the point around virality later when we talk about the Super Bowl. Now, it's not to say that you can't get positive ROI with advertising that doesn't tap System 1 and your emotions. You can. You absolutely can get effective advertising that taps System 2. But the ceiling for that advertising, the ceiling for that ROI is really 3 stars. And you have to buy a lot of that effectiveness. So it's just inherently less efficient. You can get 5-star emotional System 1 advertising. The return on investment is frankly much, much, much higher. So, looking again, we took ads that were 5 stars versus 3 stars from the IPA database, and we typically saw those ads were also much, much more efficient. So what we're looking at here is the number of long-term business effects reported by different ads that receive different star ratings according to our emotion into action score. And what you can see is that 5-star ads are more than twice as likely to deliver broader-based business effects in half the amount of time. So you get more bang for your buck in less time. The one very concerning point about this slide, quite frankly, is that most of the emotional campaigns had a lower duration. You look at 3-star campaigns, ads, 2.8 years, whereas emotional copy, 1.4 years. And there's 2 ways to look at that. Number one, they were so effective that they did their job and that advertiser moved on. Or number 2, patience among advertisers to let emotions run their course is limited, and we believe that's a mistake, and the longer-term evidence would point against it. So the other thing that it's important to say is really that it's not just the UK phenomenon. BrainJuicer, we are on a mission to really bring a new communications testing approach to the world, around the world. And we've partnered with the CASIs, so the Canadian Advertising Effectiveness Database, and picked a series of award-winning CASI spots. You can see them on the left-hand side of this page with the business effects for each generated below. And actually matched them with a competitor in the same category that had advertising at the same time with a roughly equivalent level of support. But we're not award-winning effective ads, so therefore not necessarily bad ads, but not ads that were demonstrated to deliver a business effect. We've debranded those to protect the innocent. And you can see that the average of the effective ads in the CASI's database is stronger in terms of emotion interaction. It's 3 stars versus 2 stars for the non-award-winning ads. And we're currently embarking on a process with the EVPs in the US to understand how predictive of emotional response the advertising effectiveness data is in that database. And early signs are very, very positive. We've seen that ads that are highly emotive and score well in terms of emotional response are more likely to deliver business results. And hopefully we'll have more to share on that in a couple of months. So, the other thing that Binet and Field have said is that reaching a mass audience is most effective, as opposed to a niche target or a smaller group of people. And in fact, they've seen that ads that reach a mass audience and campaigns that reach a mass audience are 3 times more likely to deliver the largest business effects than niche targeted ads. And so in the US, obviously, we have the Super Bowl platform, and it's just unique in a couple of ways. Firstly, just reaches a tremendously large audience. I think, 108 million people tuned into the Super Bowl this year, so just a month or so ago. That was actually a little down on 2012, but nonetheless, the 3rd most viewed event in US TV history. So the ability of the Super Bowl platform to reach a mass audience is tremendous. The other unique thing about the Super Bowl is the reason that people tune in to watch the game. And in fact, it's not always to watch the game. It depends what study you look at. But most studies report that more than 50% of people say that they tune in to watch the Super Bowl to watch the commercials, as opposed to the football. So, it's a unique forum for advertisers where they can reach a large group of people, as well as a group of people who are tuning in, expecting them to entertain and a very attentive audience. So, who has made the most of that forum, I think, is the question. And since 2011, BrainJuicer has been testing a large group of Super Bowl ads every year. And the most successful ad in terms of emotion interaction in 2011 was Volkswagen The Force ad. So it's a story of a young child dressed as Darth Vader trying to impact different objects through his powers, and he fails and fails until Dad comes home in a Volkswagen and remotely starts the engine, so the young child thinks he has special powers. And 5-star commercial, terrific ad, and also the most shared, so not just the most viewed, but the most shared Super Bowl spot of 2011. So moving into 2012, which was a great year for anyone who is a New York Giants fan like myself. The big question was, well, could Volkswagen repeat their success? And the answer is yes, to some extent. I mean, they aired an ad called The Dog Strikes Back. It's a story of a slightly overweight dog unable to fit through the cat flap or the cat door, and trains and goes on a diet, so that the next year he's thinner and he can chase after a very attractive-looking Volkswagen car. But the surprise winner, in terms of emotional response in 2012, was actually M&M's, who aired an ad called Just My Shell, which is a story of a very iconic, simple M&M able to charm and flirt with women in a bar. That was the most effective ad from an emotional standpoint, and therefore from a business standpoint, but also the most shared ad of 2012. It had 2 million plus shares 3 weeks after the game, which is pretty phenomenal. So moving into this year, New Orleans, you can see that the lights are still on in this picture, so it must have been taken at least during the first half. Volkswagen and M&M's, terrific job again. M&M's delivering 5-star creative, so puts them up in the top 8% of all the finished film spots that BrainJuicer has ever tested with their Love Ballad spot. But the winner this year was the Bud Clydesdale ad, The Brotherhood, which is a terrific story about the bond between a trainer and a horse who goes on to be a Clydesdale. They're separated and then they're reunited. Really was phenomenal. In the top 3% of all ads in terms of emotional response and therefore effectiveness that BrainJuicer has ever tested in the US. And also the most shared ad at the Super Bowl this year. 2.65 million shares 3 weeks after the game, which is pretty phenomenal when you think it's not just views, it's people who loved the emotional story enough to actually send it on. So, sorry, go ahead, Simon.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is great stuff. I was just going to, quick question, do we have any diagnostics on why Budweiser did so well?
Yes, we do. And really what sets it apart from the other copy is the emotional journey. So what we're looking at here is the Volkswagen spot. The Get Happy, which is really the story of a dreary office being transformed into a much happier place, as people take a ride in the car. And it's a good spot. It's a 4-star ad. And you can see second by second the way people are feeling. The light green bars represent happiness. And you can see that happiness builds relatively early in the spot. Second to second, and it's maintained throughout the end. So it's a very positive emotional journey, hence a 4-star ad. Now, What is also noticeable, though, is that you do have a certain segment feeling quite negative and feeling contemptuous in particular. And that proportion of people, they find it a bit ridiculous and they refuse to dissipate towards the end of the commercial. You know, it's a negative feeling that just never quite goes away. Now that's very much at odds with the emotional journey for the Brotherhood ad. So we're looking at the same data again, the emotional journey second by second through the Brotherhood ad, and you can see that there's tremendous happiness, but it's almost in peaks and troughs, mixed with a lot of sadness. So people are sad when the trainer and the horse are separated. Then they're sad when the Clydesdale doesn't recognize the trainer at the parade. But that sadness is able to dissipate very quickly and translate to a very, very positive ending. And I think we would say that as advertisers really target, you know, the greatest possible bang for their buck and the greatest possible System 1 response in this Super Bowl format. You know, sadness seems to be a much easier emotion to play off of than you know, no negativity at all, or contempt or anger. And what we're looking at here is the different types of happiness that people felt in response to Budweiser. And through our work with the IPA database, we've been able to identify the emotions that are most strongly related to very large business effects. So again, share increase, sales gain, or price elasticity, as well as more intermediate effects, so softer intangibles like brand awareness, an increase on brand attributes. And you can see that Budweiser Brotherhood over-indexed on lots of the emotions that are most strongly related to business effects and softer effects. So Budweiser, the Brotherhood, over-indexed by a factor of 4 to 1 versus our norm in terms of leaving people awe-inspired, or 3 to 1 in terms of uplifted, ecstatic, appreciative. So it was tremendously strong on the right emotions, and it was strong on several of them. So many strings to its bow in terms of the way it left people feeling. Now, some people may remember or not, but last year for 2012 we shared something called the Virality Index, and this was a measure that was, you know, very predictive based on all the Super Bowl testing we did last year of how likely people were to share a commercial, and it was very dependent on surprise. Surprise was, you know, the lead element really within our Virality Index. Surprise and the intensity of that surprise. So, in the true BrainJuicer spirit of, you know, generate, test, and fail and learn, we applied the Virality Index to this year's data. And full disclosure, it was an abject failure. You can see here there was a negative correlation between our Virality Index and you know, the amount of sharing of the Super Bowl spots that we tested this year. Surprise just did not seem to be a factor in virality for 2013. Advertisers were using other emotions to really deliver that effect. So what we did find, though, is that just overall positive emotion into action, was much more tightly correlated with virality. In fact, it was tightly correlated with virality across both 2011, 2012, and 2013. So, you know, System 1 emotional response overall, as opposed to any reliance on one strategy, does seem to be very indicative of virality for Super Bowl, as well as you know, business effectiveness. So, to sum up, it's all about emotion. It's about accessing System 1 and not forcing viewers to think too hard. And if you can make them feel something, they're going to do something. That will be, you know, the way to get them to act and behave a certain way. You know, the old model of communications, you know, which is much more rational, is really outdated. And we would just encourage folks to look at some of the Super Bowl ads. We'll be sending links to all the Super Bowl ads featured today after the session. There's some great creative, and so I think a lot of the advertisers deserve a pat on the back, and hopefully it'll get people's creative juices flowing. So with that, do we have any questions, Simon? I think we've got about 5 minutes left for questions.
Yeah, we've got quite a few questions. First up, a couple of people have asked about product category and how important is that, and is it different? Is System 1 more important in different categories?
Yeah, good question. I mean, absolutely not. We would say System 1 is essential within every category, and there's no such thing as a highly rational category. There's a highly rational strategy where you might be trying to communicate something that's very rational, but in that scenario, we would encourage advertisers really to find the emotional story around their message. And maybe the extreme of that is promotional advertising, but if you think about a promotional strategy, perhaps based around a holiday, tell a story about a holiday as opposed to the product that you are selling for that holiday. I don't think there's any such thing as a purely rational category where you can't unlock some System 1 feeling.
Okay, a couple of questions around our methodology in comparison to others, and how does the motion into action compare in terms of predictive power?
Well, it's more predictive. I would say that our methodology and a System 1 approach to communications testing is able to spot the most effective 5-star copy, and that is copy that will deliver the largest business effects. We ask all the System 2 stuff as well, but really that's the central principle within our design and within our analysis. I think more traditional communications testing approaches, generally speaking, measure the middle. So like we said, it is possible to have an effective ad that is based around a System 2 strategy and uses a System 2 method to assess it, but you are measuring the middle. The ceiling is lower, and there's always a danger that you will get a false positive, an ad that you think is blockbuster but just in market doesn't, deliver the large business effect that the scores would indicate, or a false negative. It could miss an ad that is 5-star System 1 but just doesn't conform to this rational model of assessment. So I think that's really the big difference. We are System 1 and traditional approaches are System 2, sometimes with just a bit of System 1 or just enough of System 1 tagged on at the end to make people comfortable.
And someone's actually specifically asking about implicit association testing. Have we ever done anything compared to that? That's not one I'm not familiar with it. So.
We've done a lot of implicit association testing, absolutely, but not in the context of communications testing. But I would say that implicit association testing is, a very System 1 tool as well and has a lot of value.
Okay, and here's another question. So, emotion into action, how is the action actually measured?
The action is measured by its link to the IPA database. So we are the only agency to have tied our metrics to an external database of efficiency rather than just our norms. And 5-star spot is likely, has been proven to deliver share increase, sales gain, or an increase in price elasticity, those very large business effects.
And then just on the face tracing, so the second-by-second slides, how are they actually, how's that information gathered?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we measure emotion through our face trace tool, which is based on the work of Paul Ekman. He established that there's 7 universal human emotions, and we, very first thing in the survey, asked people to, watch a piece of communication and then tell us, which one did it make you feel? Gut reaction. Now, after that, we actually show them the ad again, and they just indicate second by second which emotion they're most predominantly feeling, and they pause and tell us why. It's definitely not perfect, but I think it's highly, highly diagnostic, so we can track different shifts in emotion and also the reasons, the executional factors that are really driving that.
Someone's got an interesting one here about the GoDaddy ad at the Super Bowl this year. So could an ad that generates the wrong kind of emotions be a 5-star ad, like disgust?
I think it can, but I think generally speaking, the negativity has to resolve itself. So if you think back to the Brotherhood, the Clydesdale example, the sadness really resolved itself. And so, the GoDaddy spot, I'm not sure if everybody is familiar with, I think it was the kissing spot with, I think the positivity that would generate is mostly surprise and probably happiness. I'm not sure it would have resolved itself in quite such an emphatic way as the Budweiser spot. But I think if you do resolve the negative feeling, it can definitely, there's no reason that disgust couldn't be an emotion that you translate into a positive ending.
And question about sort of static formats, so things like websites or print. How do they stack up on System 1?
Well, I mean, we would say at BrainJuicer that everything has to be System 1. So all communications efforts, and we would include websites in that, need to make it simple, quick, and easy for the consumer. They have to tap their System 1. If you ask the consumer to think, they're just going to stop, because as much as we don't want to admit it, we don't like to think all that hard. So, in terms of testing multimedia, absolutely, emotional testing is key. But also, I think, for static things such as websites, we do a lot of consulting work to advise clients on how to make their websites more System 1, how to make it simple, quick, and easy for the customer, really.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Alex. I think we're out of time. If we haven't got to anyone's questions, we'll respond by email. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Hope it was useful. And, as Simon said, fire any questions our way.